Hey everybody, this is Doug Kenney from Relentless and Unstoppable. I hope everyone is doing good this nice Thursday. Well, 2025 was an interesting year for motorsports, and we saw 2311 and Front Row Motorsports, along with Bob Jenkins and Denny Hamlin and Richard Childress, take NASCAR to court, and NASCAR epically lost, although legally it was a settlement. But we know that NASCAR would have eventually caved, and we knew that NASCAR would have lost the case if it got to the verdict, and I still maintain that to this very day because NASCAR was blatantly in the wrong, and we know they broke the rules, whether NASCAR admits it or not. So it was very thrilling to see Michael Jordan in 2311, along with Denny Hamlin and Bob Jenkins, Front Row Motorsports, and all the race teams. In fact, it was awesome to see them get their evergreen charter status. And as me and my buddy Donovan spoke about a couple weeks ago, it was a thank God situation because that change to the sport was needed. And it was great to see that we had such a Titanic kind of company, not the ship, of course, but just a Titan kind of company, like a Goliath kind of company. We saw them realize the hard way that they are not above the law. It was highly important that NASCAR was held accountable. Well, anyway, NASCAR and the teams are now past it. And, it's always nice to sort of do some reflecting, though, when any sort of contentious incident happens. The 2311 Front Row versus a NASCAR lawsuit was definitely an eye-opener for so many people. It was an eye-opener for leadership that they needed to do a better job of running the sport, and also learning that they need to mind their own business, and they need to focus on themselves in their own series and running it ethically. It was an eye-opener for drivers that, had sued the sport before, like Jeremy Mayfield and a few other guys, and we're now starting to see that it is possible for, such a big company to, bow down to, the law and just say, we're going to grant you your charter status. NASCAR had to learn the hard way that, they were not above the rules and the regulations of business. And, it was also an eye opener for, the broadcasters like Larry McReynolds and, NASCAR on Fox and a couple other analysts that, were openly supportive and vocally supportive of NASCAR's position until they went silent when the Richard Childress comments came to light, along with the text messages that showed that NASCAR was trying to take on the SRX series. And then, all the evidence came out that incriminated a lot of NASCAR's past decisions, including the whole, Richard Childress claiming that he was a blue collar team, which we thought at the time he was because of, disagreements over the Richmond penalty and then the Austin Hill penalty. But then when you see how, NASCAR executive Steve Phelps, who just resigned, by the way, he announced in text messages that Richard needed to be flogged, criminally assaulted. It's like, you can sympathize with Richard now. I did not sympathize with Richard after Richmond until I saw those texts from Steve Phelps. And now, I'm like, now I've realized that, you don't know what's truly going on behind the scenes. It may be reported in the press, but you never know what people are truly going through. And, I learned from that whole deal with Richmond that you got to be careful with who you believe, even if something does seem right, which in that case, it looked like it was right. Austin Dillon right hooked Denny Hamlin and Joey Logano to win the race at Richmond. And Joey reacted with a temper tantrum and, angry that someone had the audacity to pull one of his own moves on him. And Denny Hamlin probably had the same kind of attitude, although Denny handled it more graciously than Joey did, being that Joey did a burnout in Austin Dillon's pit stall, which in my opinion should have earned a suspension. But, with NASCAR, he's Joey Logano. So as Richard says, there's certain drivers and teams that have that sway of power. So, well, anyway, the good news is, though, after a year of reflecting, I realized that I was wrong to be as critical of Richard as I was. Richard Childress, I apologize that I was heavily critical with you at Richmond with, Austin's actions. The thing is, I don't support intentional wrecking. That's the bottom line. I don't support intentional wrecking, and but I heavily respect your team and the impact you've left on the sport. And as I mentioned, I didn't sympathize with you and the team until I heard and read what Steve Phelps had written in those text messages about how you were a stupid redneck that needed to be flogged, which is criminal, by the way, criminal assault. And then you claiming that you were, a blue collar team, that just made it add up for me. And so, as much as I don't agree with Austin's actions at Richmond, I feel for you now because, I've always been a vocal believer that if NASCAR is going to implement any sort of penalty against anybody, they have to do it in a way that's unbiased, and if you can't implement a penalty without bias, it's just you don't belong in the business of racing. That's just the truth. And ultimately, the whole notion about the NASCAR leadership was proven with the 2311 racing lawsuit outcome and then Steve Phelps resigning, although we all know it was not possible for Steve Phelps to keep his job after the lawsuit and what was exposed. So, after some time of reflecting, Richard, I thank you for your impact on the sport. You are not a stupid redneck and you don't owe your fortune to anyone. You earned your fortune by picking a great driver in Dale Earnhardt. And 2311, Michael Jordan and Denny Hamlin, along with Bob Jenkins in front row. Once again, congratulations on winning the lawsuit.